think that in 5 years we won't be able to recognize it. Before then, accounting was done on paper. And then the first generation of accounting solutions came forward. Now, this revolution with AI is going to be bigger. So imagine that instead you go to an AI online with a knowledge that is greater than your local CPA.
Welcome to the Horizon Lab podcast. Today we're featuring Johan Colvig, the CEO and founder of ClearGrowth. ClearGrowth is a company that is revolutionizing the way that small businesses run their financial forecasting, using AI and other tools to give small business owners the financial intelligence that they need. Johan's journey begins with playing with Commodore 64 at the age of 9 years old, and then moving on to build his own company that is absolutely amazing. So, without further ado, let's welcome Johan. Hey, Johan, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. So can you tell us about your first experiences with coding when you're 8, 9 years old?
Yeah, sure. So my first experience was my brother's friend. He brought to our home a VIC-20 computer. And a VIC-20 was not very impressive even back by those standards. And I remember sitting there an entire evening, and they attempted to enter a program manually that they had from a printout. It probably was 10 pages, and there was some syntax error in it, and it never worked. But they took 3 hours doing that. But I was 8 years old, and I was sold in the first spot. This was just such a fascinating new world. Then about 8 months later, my brother, he got a Commodore 64. I turned 9 by then, and we didn't have a disk drive. We didn't have a floppy drive. Obviously, the internet was something that hadn't really been invented yet. So we just had a computer with absolutely no input into it. So the only thing you could use it for at this stage until we got a tape drive was actually the first thing we got. You could code on it. So that's what we did. This Commodore 64 came with a built-in basic prompt. That's basically how you controlled the machine. And so that's when I wrote my first program in. Wasn't a very impressive program for sure, but I was 9 years old and I understood the basics of how a computer program works.
So what was the first program? Do you remember what it was?
Oh yeah, the first program was a program that would change the colors of the screens and make them flash in different types.
Well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
How
well,
long did that take you?
that took a couple of hours.
Okay.
I was 9.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's good. That's really good. That's beautiful. Nice. So what's it like growing up in Denmark with access to all this technology at such an early age? Did that really help your career growth and stuff later on?
I actually think that it impaired it.
Okay.
Compared to America, it definitely impaired it because it's in America you have more technology around you. You had more, you earlier had access to the internet. Well, at least to local dial-up BBS built-in board systems and whatnot. We didn't have that in Denmark, so you were more isolated, I would say, technology-wise from there. I could go into my city and find a shop that would have, some games and some computer stuff. But if you wanted the real cool stuff, you had to travel in to a store in Copenhagen, which was like an hour by train away, at least for kids like us. And that was just paradise to go in there. So I honestly think that had I been born in America, I would have developed technology faster and better than being born in Denmark because it was so isolated.
Interesting. Well, don't you think though that you developed it quite a bit faster than some other people?
Oh yes, for sure, for sure. I mean, I think I definitely had the. I don't know if I had a talent or not, but it's just that understanding of how a computer program works that I got early on. I mean, when I started at college, I studied computer science at the University of Copenhagen, and it definitely was an advantage I had compared to everybody else most other people at the studies there, that I knew how things work. I could already program. It wasn't about acquiring those skills.
Interesting. So
I
it's more about
remember
theory?
there's some theory in algorithms that definitely help, and but I once had an exam in computer science in high school, and there on the spot, I was asked by my teacher to, it's kind of a blackboard exam that I would have, and there I was asked by my teacher, we had a sequence, and he said, "Well, how would you sort this sequence?" I'm like, "I don't know." And then I, on the spot, thought out an algorithm, and then he's like, "Well, what would you call that?" I'm like, "I don't know." And then, "Well, what about binary search?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that seems reasonable." And I mean, I never heard of that, but I invented it on the spot when I was asked a question. At that time, I was 18 years old. So that background definitely helped, but the environment could have helped me more.
I see what you mean. That makes sense. So, did you have any mentors growing up or anybody that you really looked up to?
No.
No?
the I learned the opposite way. I saw what other people were doing. I will mention their names, and then I said, you know what? That's a terrible mistake. I'll never make that one.
Okay.
So I more had reversed mentors on learning what not to do than I had with learning what to do.
Well, I mean that also counts in a way. Yeah.
It definitely counts. It definitely helped in many ways.
Yeah, awesome. So let's talk a little bit about Clear Growth. Can you tell me what it is you guys do?
Yeah, for sure. We are a cash flow fintech that uses AI accounting to increase our customers' cash balance.
Okay, nice. Can you explain what inspired you to grow this company?
I've always been interested in finance as well. I've always been interested in business, and I guess I'm different from most other engineers that it's not just about the coding, it's about the utility of the code. And about 18 years ago, I got introduced to business intelligence for the first time. And business intelligence is a very different type of engineering that typical application programming is. You're thinking different ways, you're thinking in performance, you're thinking in data. And just the way that business intelligence really seek to help and enlighten your customers, the users. It's not just about clicking, it's about giving you an input to something you didn't know that will make you make better decisions.
Interesting. Do you find that a lot of business owners lack that type of visibility in their financial health?
Oh, yes. I would say very, very few percentage have it. It's the business owners, they run their business basically of three numbers, maybe two. First one is their bank account. How much money do I have in my bank account? If my money is up from a month ago, I'm doing good. Second one is their revenue. They typically know their revenue very well. These are the two numbers they know with certainty. And then if they're good, they also know their profit. But it's not always they know that.
Okay, and what other steps would you want to
So,
track or would you recommend?
well, the first essential question that I love asking this question to any business owner is, how much does a new customer cost you?
Cost per acquisition.
Yeah, I don't call it cost per acquisition because it sounds a little bit more technical, and many times when you begin go into those technical formulations with business owners, they kind of disconnect. So I like to say that, but it's very few I meet that has an idea of their cost per acquisition when I meet them, and this is even worse if it's improving or if it's decreasing. They don't have an idea if the customers they're getting is actually a good idea, if it's profitable for them. There's certain customers you must say no to because you can never make money out of them. And that is essential that you know that.
Interesting. Do you find that a lot of business owners that don't have these key points, they tend to do worse than the others?
Oh, it's they're basically operating blindfolded, and that is why that we see what is the statistics? Half of all businesses in America fold within the first 3 years.
That's a pretty heavy statistic.
Yeah, and it's in some industries it will be even worse. If you go to a restaurant, they will fold quicker than that. And it's not necessarily because they have a bad idea or they're bad at what they're doing, but they just don't know how they can sustain their business, how they can grow it, how they can nurture it.
Interesting. So, for a small business, say a car detailing company, how would you recommend that they start paying attention to some of these metrics? Saying they have a small team, maybe it's a guy, his brother, and two other people or something. Like, what would you recommend that they do in that situation?
A car detailing business is easier to keep track of than most other businesses because of their cost of goods sold would be very limited. Now, I never worked with a car detailing business before, but this is just kind of what I understand from them. So their main cost is going to be, well, they have the salaries to themselves. Then they have the supplies that they're using when they detail a car. They will probably have some equipment with them as well. They might have to equip a van to drive out if they're doing it on the spot, or they will have some rent if people are coming to them. And then they will have some cost of acquisition in pure customer acquisition. So that's a relatively easy business to keep track of. So
Okay.
in that case, what I would recommend that they do is take control over their own finances, whether they do it in Excel or whether they do it in QuickBooks or whatever they do. But simply say, well, whenever I have a cost, what type of cost is that? Is it something that relates to sales? Is it something that relates to my operations? Hereby meaning people going out and actually doing this, or is it something that relates to administration? And then simply just put each of the costs into these three categories. There can be a fourth category, which is research and development, but I don't expect that you would have that a lot in the car detailing business. Then when you have all your sales cost put in, if the owner is the one doing the acquisition of customers, I would say, well, how much are you paying yourself? How much of your time are you spending on that? If that's 25%, then take 25% of your salary and put into that bucket. Now, during a time period, that can be a month, a quarter, whatever, count how many new customers you got, sum your total sales cost with the number of new customers, and now you have your acquisition cost. Then you can also take your operations, divide that with your sales, and now you actually will begin to have some pretty good understanding of, well, whenever I sell for $100, it costs me $40 to deliver that, and it means that I'm keeping 60. Okay, so where am I wasting that $60? Now we can actually have that. So it's something you can do easily yourself. If you're small, you don't need a tool like ClearGrowth to do that, but it gives you a basic understanding of where you're heading and what are you doing.
Okay, and so then when would clear growth make sense? In what context? At what point?
If this car dealing business grew to be bigger, they're probably a little bit too small at that point, I would imagine. But if they grew to be bigger, Clear Growth can help automate the entire administration. Depending on how you do your billing, we might not be able to automate that, but pretty much everything else we can automate. And the way that helps is we give you this overview for cheaper amount of money than what you can pay yourself to do that, because it's an AI doing it. And second of all, we will pay your bills on time. And one of the scary things we found out was that 32% of all bills are paid early. And that means that's just money that you're giving out of your bank account too early, which is reducing your cash balance unnecessarily, probably with something like 10 to 15%. So that's one of one of the things that the tool comes in with built in, is that we will simply just pay your bills on time, and that improves your cash flow.
Interesting. When you say pay your bills on time, are you talking about like the difference between having a monthly payment and having an annual payment, or are you talking about something like a net 30 arrangement? Or
Exactly. If you have, and we found that many people with a net 30 arrangement will pay it after 7 days instead of after 30 days.
okay, and you recommend to pay it after 30 days exactly?
Yeah. If the term is net 30, then wait until 30 days.
Interesting. Don't you think that some business owners, given that you say they run off of two numbers, revenue and how much money is in my bank account, right? Don't you think some would look at the money in their bank account and then maybe find something else to use it for?
Exactly. So, well, they definitely would that, and that's again the maturity of operating your business, is to know the reason why this is important is that when you have income that comes every week, maybe even every day, if you pay a bill early and you're having multiple bills that follow the same pattern, you're moving that cash flow forward in time when it could be further back, and therefore increase your cash balance. And yes, you can use that money for other things. And you know what? Frankly, you should. If those money can be used to grow your business, to increase your sales, to increase your ad spend, you should do that, because you're going to have another payment coming in and another one coming in after that. So whenever you see a cash crunch, what's the first thing large corporations do? All net 30 now is net 90. It's the easiest way for them to loan money without paying an interest. Small businesses should do the same. Now, if you have a business that is paid only once a month in the first of the month, then it obviously doesn't matter if you pay the bill after 7 days or after 30 days, because it's going to be the same amount of money. But when you have money coming in constantly distributed over the month, then it matters.
Interesting, interesting. So for a software development company, they don't have a lot of net 30 or net 90 arrangements. What would you recommend that they do? Or in that context, it doesn't make sense.
It can make sense if depending on how they're doing that. So I had a customer that was a software development company. Specifically, they were a consulting company, and their terms with their customers, this was in the healthcare industry, their terms were anywhere from net 30 to net 90. They paid their external contractors after 1 to 7 days, every 14 days. Their receivables was $1 million and their payables was zero. So they had a deficit of $1 million in their cash flow because that they were paying their costs early, but they were getting paid from their customers late. There was only one person to finance that, and that was the owner, and it was a problem every time. And they couldn't grow the business because all of their cash was tied up into receivables. So in a case like that, and that's how when I operated a consulting business in Denmark, it's like, you know what, you get paid when I get paid. If you don't do that, you're just being, the Bank of Austin or the Bank of Johan or the Bank of Joe. You're not taking interest, but you have this huge deficit in your cash that you just need to finance somewhere, even though your business is profitable.
Interesting. So changing the way that you do your payroll in that case would be
Well,
the thought.
you can't do it to W-2 employees, but if you have 1099 employees, you can move towards that. That's something our software would show.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that would be a little bit jarring for quite a few contractors, though.
It will, and you don't necessarily have to push it to net 90, but but there needs to be a little bit of it needs to be fair, because you can't have a company, especially if it's a smaller company, sitting with those type of terms. And if you go into the larger, if you go into Accenture or some of these guys, they won't act as a bank for you. And if you go to the customer directly, right? If you as a contractor were able to get this customer outside of the broker, what do you think the customer is going to do? They're going to pay you directly? No, they're going to pay you net 90 because you're just a vendor like everybody and they don't give a crap.
Interesting. Interesting. So, how do you feel AI is going to change the accounting space?
I think fundamentally, I think that in 5 years we won't be able to recognize it. Back in the 80s and 90s, before then, accounting was done on paper, right? The reason you had a bookkeeper was literally someone who wrote in a book. And then the first generation of accounting solutions came forward, QuickBooks Desktop and other solutions came, and they completely revolutionized that business. So within years, everything had moved to digitally to a computer. Then 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that then began the transformation from being on the desktop to being online. It didn't do a lot of change. It just made the availability a little bit more practical, and you began to have some integrations that could make things, a little bit more useful. You can have integration with the bank that will load your bank transactions directly in, that helped reconciling the books, but it wasn't the same type of revolution that the computer had done 20 years before. Now, this revolution with AI is going to be bigger because, well, now tax season is coming up, right? And, you can go into TurboTax, and that is painful. It's still going to take 20 to 30 minutes, and you're still going to be presented with 50 questions that you have absolutely no idea what they're asking about. Like, I think that's a no because I don't know what it is, right? And you know that if you're speaking with a professional, your tax deductions would be higher, right?
Yes.
Now, if you want to go to a professional in the beginning of April for your tax return, yeah, good luck.
Yeah.
Those guys literally work from 6 in the morning till 2 in the morning for 2 months straight. It's not a profession I envy. And their entire revenue is, well, 80%, 80, 90% of their revenue is pressed into 2 months. And it's frustrating for them, and it's frustrating for their customers as well. So imagine that instead you go to an AI online whenever you want, that doesn't have any limitations of bandwidth, with a knowledge that is greater than your local CPA. And then you say, hey, this is what I have. This is my bank. This is, whatever. And then it, will ask you some questions that you can actually understand. And then it will sit and think about it for a total of 2 seconds and like, you know what, this is what you should do. And we'll do this and we'll do this. And you get the maximum tax return. You get it for minimum amount of money. You don't have to beg for its attention, and you can do it whenever you want to. That's the future. Of course, there's a 500,000 CPAs in the country, or at least 250,000, that's gonna be out without a job. Sorry, but that's the future. For
Interesting.
regular accounting, same thing. People doing data entry, people pressing buttons, people paying manually or matching payments manually. The only thing that's going to be difficult to automate is checks. That's the only thing. But
Don't you think
everything
checks are
else,
like kind of old though and on the way out?
oh yes. They in Europe they stopped the clearinghouses. In Denmark, checks stopped being a thing 5 years ago because the last clearinghouse closed.
Mm.
Meaning that you can't clear the check between two banks. You can basically only use a check within the bank that it was issued. We have the real-time payments coming out now. I think that's going to be pretty huge once that's fully implemented. There's going to be some resistance to it because people are going to realize, if I don't do this, what's my job then? And yeah, it's going to be, what are you going to do with someone who's been working in accounting for 30 years and then suddenly they get replaced with an AI? I don't have the answer to that question, but it's going to be a problem.
It's going to be a problem in a lot of industries, I believe.
Yeah, no, we're definitely looking into a mass revolution of the economy, that instead of taking 100 years like the industrial revolution or the agricultural revolution, it's going to take 10. And that means it's the same people. You have a job today and you don't have a job in 10 years, maybe even shorter. There's people right now going to college being trained in professions that are going to be obsolete by the time they graduate. And my wife experienced that. She started to be a librarian in the mid 90s. When she was done, the internet had come and libraries were no longer a thing. So this has happened because of technology within our lifetimes. Now it's just coming for everyone. Sorry.
Yeah. Wow. So I always end the podcast with a pretty fun question. So if you could go back in time and hand your 9-year-old self one piece of technology, any piece of technology from today, what would that be?
Um, well, I know what the 9-year-old would want, but I'm not sure that is what I would give him.
Okay.
Um, I mean, if you take one piece, I mean, a 9-year-old would just love Roblox and YouTube, right? Um,
Yes.
that's what 9 years old love. That's what they would pick. I would definitely give them access to the AI, give them access to tools like Midjourney and ChatGPT, because the amount of stuff you can create with that. I mean, a 9-year-old sitting and playing with Midjourney and generating images, what's not to love?
Love it.
Develop creativity, develop ways of formulating, seeing the results. Wait a minute, and then you see a new picture. And I wish that more 9-year-olds would do that instead of sitting in Roblox, because that would develop their creativity for something that's, I believe, is going to be very useful in the future.
Wow. Well, I really appreciate your time on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I look forward to possibly having another one in the future.
You're welcome anytime. Thank you for having me.